My name is Gail. 56 years old, and I never imagined that at my own daughter's wedding, I would experience both the greatest humiliation and the most unexpected vindication of my life. After losing everything in the financial crash, my relationship with my daughter Madison deteriorated as she chose wealth and status with her father over loyalty to me. At her lavish wedding, her fiancé Jackson publicly humiliated me by smashing my face into the wedding cake and calling me a beggar. But what happened 5 minutes later shocked everyone in that ballroom, including my daughter. If you want to know how a mother's secret changed everything in an instant, hit that subscribe button now. And let me know where you're watching from. Trust me when I say that some stories of justice are served as sweetly as wedding cake. I wasn't always the woman whose face was shoved into a wedding cake. There was a time when I was the one ordering custom 5-tier confections for corporate events where CEOs and tech moguls lined up to speak with me. My story begins in Lakeville, Indiana, a town so small it barely registers on most maps. My parents worked honest jobs their entire lives, my father at the local manufacturing plant and my mother as a school secretary. They taught me the value of hard work, but also instilled in me a hunger for something more than our modest existence. From an early age, I had a head for numbers and a determination that my teachers noticed. While other girls in my high school were planning weddings, I was planning business ventures. I babysat, mowed lawns, and eventually worked weekends at the local diner to save for college. My parents could offer moral support, but little financial help for higher education. The day I received my acceptance letter to Indiana University's business program was the first time I saw my stoic father cry. College was a blur of classes, study sessions, and jobs. I worked as a resident advisor to cover housing-weighted tables between classes and took overnight shifts at a 24-hour convenience store on weekends. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. While my classmates partied, I was either working or studying in the library until it closed. Those years taught me grit, reinforcing my parents' lessons that nothing worthwhile comes easily. It was during my final year at a campus recruitment event that I met Thomas Harrington. He was 5 years older, already established at a prestigious financial consulting firm in Chicago, and had returned to his alma mater to scout fresh talent. When he approached me after my sharp questioning during the presentation, I assumed he was annoyed. Instead, he offered me his card and suggested I apply for their competitive internship program. 3 months later, I joined the firm as their newest junior consultant. Thomas became my mentor, showing me the ropes of an industry dominated by men who looked at me with either dismissal or inappropriate interest. Thomas was different, treating me as an equal and recognizing my potential. Our professional relationship evolved into friendship and eventually romance. Our courtship was as efficient as our business dealings weekends in Chicago, exploring the city between long hours at the office. Thomas proposed after just 8 months with a practicality that appealed to me, presenting the pros and cons of our union like a business proposal, but with a warmth in his eyes that told me this wasn't just a merger of convenience. We married in a small ceremony, investing the money we saved into our first home instead of an extravagant wedding. The early years of our marriage were defined by ambition. We worked long hours, often meeting in the kitchen at midnight to share a late dinner and stories from our respective offices. While Thomas climbed the corporate ladder, I began to feel constrained by the politics and limitations of traditional corporate structure. At 28, I made the terrifying decision to leave my secure position and start my own technology consulting business. The timing coincided with the early boom of internet businesses. Companies were desperate for guidance navigating this new frontier, and my firm Gale Force Technologies offered strategic consulting that bridged traditional business models with emerging digital opportunities. Thomas supported my venture, at least initially, our evenings now filled with discussions of my client acquisitions and growth strategies. Starting my own business consumed even more of my time and energy, and we postponed starting a family year after year. It was only after a health scare at 29, a benign tumor, that nonetheless served as a wake-up call, that we decided not to wait any longer. Madison came into our lives when I was 30, a perfect baby girl who immediately became the center of my world even as I continued building my company. The challenge of balancing motherhood with entrepreneurship tested me in ways that even my hardscrabble upbringing hadn't prepared me for. I took conference calls while nursing, brought Madison to the office in a bassinet, and learned to type with one hand while holding her with the other. Sleep deprivation became my constant companion, but so did a fierce joy I'd never known before. Thomas took on more parenting responsibilities than many fathers of his generation, but the majority still fell to me, as did the guilt, when I missed milestones due to work commitments. As Madison entered preschool, Galeforce Technologies hit its stride. A major contract with a Fortune 500 company led to referrals that snowballed into explosive growth. I expanded from 3 employees to 30, then 100. We moved from a cramped office above a sandwich shop to occupying 3 floors in a downtown Chicago high-rise. The financial statements that crossed my desk each month showed numbers that my younger self couldn't have imagined. Our lifestyle expanded with our bank account. We moved from our modest starter home to a mansion in the prestigious North Shore suburbs. Thomas upgraded his sensible sedan to a sleek German sports car. Madison transitioned from public school to an exclusive private academy, where tuition cost more than my entire college education. Vacations meant private jets to tropical locations rather than driving to my parents' lake cabin. Throughout this transformation, I tried to keep Madison grounded. I brought her to the office to see that wealth came from work, insisted she continue her chores despite our housekeeper's presence, and required her to donate a portion of her generous allowance to charity. But children are perceptive, and she couldn't help but absorb the attitudes of her peers at school and her father at home. Thomas changed with our rising status, becoming increasingly focused on appearances and social connections. The man who once loved our quiet evenings at home now thrived at charity galas and country club events, networked on golf courses, and developed a taste for collector wines and custom suits. While I remained driven by the challenge and fulfillment of building something meaningful, Thomas seemed intoxicated by the trappings of success. Madison was 10 when I noticed the first cracks in our marriage. Thomas began coming home later, offering vague explanations about client dinners and networking events. He grew critical of my continued hands-on approach to my business, suggesting I was working like we're still struggling, despite our wealth. When I mentioned expanding Galeforce into emerging international markets requiring significant travel, he questioned why I couldn't relax and enjoy what we've built instead. What neither of us knew then was that our carefully constructed life was built on shifting sands. The economic winds were changing, and the storm of 2008 was gathering on the horizon, preparing to sweep away everything we thought was secure. The first signs of trouble came in subtle ways. Clients delayed signing contract renewals. Projects were scaled back rather than expanded. The economy's initial tremors were manageable, and I remained optimistic, assuring my team and family that Galeforce was built to weather market fluctuations. After all, we had substantial cash reserves and a diverse client portfolio spanning multiple industries. That optimism evaporated as September 2008 unfolded. Lehman Brothers collapsed. Markets plummeted. Panic spread through the business community like wildfire. Overnight, companies slashed budgets, and consulting services were among the first expenditures cut. 3 of our largest clients terminated contracts within a single week, citing existential threats to their own businesses. Projects representing 40% of our annual revenue vanished almost overnight. I worked around the clock, calling clients personally, renegotiating terms, offering discounts, and seeking new business anywhere it might be found. My executive team and I took substantial pay cuts to avoid layoffs, knowing our employees had families and mortgages. I emptied personal investment accounts to maintain the company's cash flow, confident that this was a temporary setback we could overcome with enough grit and sacrifice. It was during this critical period that I began noticing Thomas's increasing absences and distraction. When home, he was constantly on his phone, stepping out of rooms to take calls, and growing defensive when I asked about his work. I attributed his behavior to stress about our financial situation until the night I used his laptop to check on a time-sensitive client proposal after my computer crashed. The email notification that popped up wasn't from a client or colleague, but from someone named Brittany with the subject line, "Missing you already." My hands shook as I opened it, revealing intimate details of their weekend together at a lake house, while Thomas had told me he was at a business conference in Minneapolis. Attached photos confirmed what the message implied, showing my husband of 16 years, with a woman who couldn't have been more than 25, his assistant at the financial firm. When confronted that night, Thomas didn't deny it. Instead, he turned the blame on me. "You've been checked out of this marriage for years, Gail," he said with stunning callousness. "All you care about is your precious company. Brittany actually makes me a priority." The argument escalated until he finally admitted the affair had been going on for nearly a year, and that he deserved happiness after feeling neglected. 2 days later, while I was in emergency meetings, trying to secure a loan to meet payroll, Thomas moved out. Madison, 14, and already struggling with the social implications of our changing financial status, was devastated. Rather than recognizing his betrayal, she internalized the abandonment as further evidence that our family was falling apart because of the business pressures I had created. The divorce proceedings turned uglier than I could have imagined. Thomas hired an aggressive attorney who portrayed me as a workaholic who had neglected my family obligations. More shocking was discovering that Thomas had been methodically transferring assets into accounts I couldn't access, preparing for this split, while I focused on saving the company. He fought for and won primary custody of Madison, arguing that my unstable business situation and long work hours made me an unsuitable primary parent. The financial and emotional strain of fighting both professional and personal battles became unsustainable. Despite my best efforts, Galeforce Technologies began missing client deliverables as key team members left for more stable opportunities. Our reputation, once sterling, suffered. By the time the divorce was finalized with Thomas receiving favorable terms due to my compromised position, the company was on life support. The final blow came when our largest remaining client, a telecommunications giant, was acquired by a competitor who immediately terminated all outside consulting contracts. Without that revenue stream, I could no longer meet operational expenses or service the loans I'd taken out to keep the business afloat. After 11 years of building Galeforce Technologies from nothing into a respected industry leader, I filed for bankruptcy protection and laid off my remaining loyal employees. The speed of my fall from grace was breathtaking. Within 18 months, I went from being featured in Business Week as one of America's top women entrepreneurs to selling my designer wardrobe on consignment to make rent. The mansion was foreclosed upon. The luxury cars repossessed. My sterling credit rating plummeted as debts mounted. Former friends and colleagues suddenly became unavailable screens, going straight to voicemail when I called seeking connections to job opportunities. The most painful loss, however, was Madison. Though the custody arrangement allowed regular visitation, she increasingly made excuses to cancel our time together. When we did meet, she seemed embarrassed by my circumstances, especially in contrast to the lavish lifestyle Thomas maintained with Brittany, now his fiancé, in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. Madison had transferred to an even more exclusive private school, where she quickly learned that social standing depended on material displays of wealth. At 15, during one of our increasingly rare dinners together, Madison revealed the depth of her resentment. "Dad says you cared more about your company than our family," she said, pushing pasta around her plate at the modest Italian restaurant I could barely afford. "He says that's why everything fell apart." "That's not true, Madison," I tried to explain. "The financial crisis destroyed thousands of businesses, and your father was having an affair long before the company had problems." "Well, at least Dad can still take care of me," she replied with teenage cruelty. "At least I don't have to be embarrassed when friends come over to his place." Those words cut deeper than any financial loss. I had built my business partly to provide for her future, to show her what a woman could accomplish through determination and intelligence. Instead, she saw only the failure, not the years of success or the circumstances beyond my control that had caused our reversal of fortune. By the time Madison started college at Northwestern University, fully funded by Thomas, our relationship had deteriorated to holiday phone calls and occasional strained lunches. She majored in marketing and communications, surrounded by wealthy friends, and integrated into Thomas and Brittany's social circle. I worked 2 jobs a day, position as an office manager, and evening shifts at a call center, slowly rebuilding my finances while living in a studio apartment that was smaller than Madison's childhood bedroom had been. The depression that followed my dramatic downfall was as severe as it was invisible. I maintained a stoic facade during the day, but spent many nights questioning every decision I'd made. Had I been too ambitious? Had I neglected Madison and Thomas? Did I deserve this complete dismantling of everything I'd worked for? The successful, confident woman I had been seemed like a character I'd played in someone else's life. The turning point came unexpectedly on Madison's 21st birthday. I'd saved for months to buy her a simple silver bracelet, nothing compared to the luxury items Thomas would surely provide, but meaningful because it was engraved with a message: "Resilience is our legacy." When I presented it during our birthday lunch, she looked at it with thinly veiled disappointment before placing it back in its box with a perfunctory thank you. That night alone in my apartment, something broke and reformed within me. I realized I had been defining myself by what I had lost, rather than by the skills and determination that had built my success in the first place. The financial world had taken my company. Thomas had taken my daughter and my confidence, but my intelligence, experience, and work ethic remained untouched. I made a promise to myself that night that would change everything, though no one else would know for years to come. I would rebuild not for Madison or to prove anything to Thomas, but for myself. And this time, I would do it entirely on my own terms, without anyone knowing until I was ready to reveal the truth. My rebuilding began with a single phone call to Eleanor Martinez, my former mentor from business school, who had gone on to become a venture capitalist specializing in female-founded startups. I hadn't spoken to her in years, too ashamed of my failure to reach out when things collapsed. Her warm reception caught me off guard. "Gail Harrington," she said when I finally worked up the courage to call, "I've been wondering when you'd surface again. The business world hasn't been the same without your voice." "You knew about what happened?" I asked, embarrassment making my voice tight. "Of course I did. This industry talks. But I also know the crash took down people far less talented than you. What's your next move?" That simple question, asked with expectation rather than pity, was exactly what I needed. Over coffee in her downtown office the following week, I shared the kernel of an idea that had been forming during my nights answering calls at the service center. I had noticed a gap in financial technology, particularly for small businesses, struggling with the increasingly complex regulations that had followed the economic crisis. The current solutions are either too expensive for small operations or too simplistic to provide real compliance security, I explained. There's room for a middle solution, especially if it's cloud-based with a subscription model that keeps initial costs low. Eleanor listened intently, asking pointed questions that helped refine my concept. At the end of our 2-hour meeting, she opened her checkbook. "This isn't charity," she said firmly as she wrote. "It's an investment. $25,000. Not enough to build the full platform, but enough for you to develop a prototype and business plan to attract serious funding." I worked from my apartment using a portion of Eleanor's investment for a high-end laptop and development software. By day, I continued at the office manager job, saving every penny possible. Evenings and weekends were devoted to research market analysis and teaching myself the fundamentals of coding to better communicate with the developers I would eventually need to hire. 4 months of this double life yielded a comprehensive business plan and wireframes for what would become Fiancé, a compliance and financial management platform specifically designed for businesses too small for enterprise solutions, but too complex for basic bookkeeping software. Eleanor arranged presentations with select investors in her network, carefully choosing those who valued substance over status and wouldn't be prejudiced by my previous bankruptcy. The first round of funding came through a small venture firm that specialized in fintech disruption. Their $1 million investment came with strict conditions and significant equity dilution, but provided the capital needed to hire a small development team and secure office space, a modest suite in an aging building far from the gleaming towers where Galeforce had once resided. Crucially, I made a decision that would protect both the company and my emotional well-being. I established a holding company, Phoenix Innovations, as the official parent entity, with myself as the private owner, shielded by corporate structures. Publicly, Fiancé would have a different CEO. Michael Chen, a talented executive I'd worked with years before, who understood my need for anonymity and was happy to be the public face, while I operated as the chief strategy officer behind the scenes. This arrangement served multiple purposes. It protected the company from potential bias related to my previous bankruptcy. It shielded me from Thomas or creditors attempting to claim stakes in my new venture. Most importantly, it allowed me to rebuild without the emotional complications of Madison or my former social circle discovering my renewed success before I was ready to reveal it. The development phase was grueling, with numerous technical challenges, and 2 complete redesigns before we had a product ready for beta testing. Cash ran dangerously low several times, forcing me to take personal loans against my meager assets to make payroll. There were nights I slept on the office floor, too exhausted to return to my apartment after 20-hour workdays. 1 year into development, we secured our first beta clients, small accounting firms willing to test our platform in exchange for heavily discounted lifetime subscriptions. Their feedback was invaluable, highlighting practical issues our development team hadn't anticipated and confirming the market need for our specific solution. By the 18-month mark, we had a viable product and began official sales efforts. Fiancé's growth trajectory was nothing like Galeforce's rapid expansion. This was deliberate, a lesson learned from my previous experience, where too much too fast had created vulnerabilities. We added clients carefully, ensuring each implementation was successful before moving to the next. Revenue grew steadily rather than explosively, but with much healthier margins and sustainable cash flow. 3 years after that initial coffee with Eleanor, Fiancé reached profitability, an unusual achievement for a software startup still in growth mode. Our client retention rate stood at 98%, and industry publications began taking notice of the innovative solution transforming compliance for the underserved mid-market segment. Michael handled all press and public appearances, while I directed product strategy and operations from behind the scenes. The company's success translated to personal financial recovery, though I maintained my modest lifestyle. I moved from my studio to a comfortable but unassuming 2-bedroom apartment. I traded my decade-old economy car for a newer but still practical model. To anyone observing my daily life, including Madison on her infrequent visits, I appeared to be a middle manager who had found stable employment after a career setback, nothing more. What no one knew was that my ownership stake in Phoenix Innovations, and consequently FinClear, had made me wealthy again on paper at least. When a major financial services corporation approached us with an acquisition offer. In our 5th year, the valuation exceeded even my optimistic projections. After careful consideration and negotiations that ensured our team would remain intact and our product vision respected, we accepted a deal worth $320 million. My share after investor distributions amounted to just over $140 million. I transferred the majority into secure conservative investments, established a foundation for supporting women in technology, and kept my everyday life exactly the same. Not even Eleanor knew the full extent of my stake, or the resulting windfall as I had gradually bought back equity during profitable quarters. Throughout these years of secret rebuilding, my relationship with Madison remained strained and distant. She graduated from Northwestern and took a position at a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago, becoming fully integrated into the upper echelon social circles that Thomas and Brittany frequented. Our interactions were limited to occasional dutiful lunches and obligatory holiday calls, during which she spoke enthusiastically about her career friends and travels while asking minimal questions about my life, clearly assuming there was nothing of interest to report. It was during one such lunch, just after FinClear's acquisition had closed, that Madison nervously twisted her napkin before making an announcement. "Mom, I'm engaged," she said, extending her hand to reveal an enormous diamond ring. "His name is Jackson Williams. His family owns Williams Development Group. We're planning the wedding for June." I summoned genuine happiness for her, despite the knowledge that I had been excluded from this significant part of her life until the decision was already made. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you. Tell me about him." As Madison gushed about Jackson, his family's real estate empire, their shared love of luxury travel, and their plans for a lavish wedding at the Peninsula Hotel, I listened with growing unease. Every description centered on material wealth and social status, with barely a mention of his character values or how he treated her when no one was watching the things that truly sustain a marriage through difficult times. When the wedding invitation arrived a month later, my name was alone on the envelope, with no +1 option, despite Thomas and Brittany both being allowed to bring guests. The RSVP card requested dietary restrictions, and more tellingly, my employment information for the seating arrangements. The implication was clear: I would be seated according to my perceived social standing. I called Madison to ask about meeting Jackson before the wedding, suggesting dinner at my apartment or a casual lunch. "Oh, there's no need for that, Mom," she said dismissively. "You'll meet him at the rehearsal dinner. It's going to be at Le Cirque, by the way, so maybe wear that black dress you have. The simple one. It should be fine for the family table." Her casual assessment of my wardrobe and suitability for public display with her new family cut deeply, but I maintained my composure. "I look forward to meeting him," I said, not revealing that I had already researched Jackson Williams extensively, including his reputation for arrogance among business associates and his family's questionable development practices that had displaced low-income communities for luxury condominiums. As the wedding approached, I faced a critical decision. Should I reveal my true financial situation before the ceremony, potentially changing how I was treated, but also exposing Madison's and Jackson's materialistic values? Or should I maintain my disguise, attending as the modest, struggling mother, to see how I would be treated when perceived as having no financial value to offer? After much reflection, I chose the latter path. Not out of bitterness or desire for eventual revenge, but because I wanted my daughter to recognize the superficiality of valuing people based on their wealth or status. If she and her new family accepted me as I appeared to be, it would demonstrate character worth celebrating. If not, the revelation would be a necessary lesson, however painful. What I could never have anticipated was just how dramatic and public that lesson would become. The Peninsula Hotel ballroom had been transformed into a spring wonderland for Madison's wedding, with thousands of white orchids and roses cascading from crystal chandeliers and forming elaborate table centerpieces. Champagne flowed from fountain displays, while servers in white gloves offered endless trays of gourmet appetizers. The estimated cost for flowers alone would have covered my apartment rent for 2 years. I arrived early wearing a simple but elegant navy blue dress I had purchased from a department store clearance rack, accessorized with my mother's pearl necklace, the only piece of fine jewelry I had kept after the bankruptcy. The wedding coordinator glanced at my invitation with poorly concealed surprise, as if questioning whether I belonged among the expensively dressed guests already mingling in the reception area. "You must be the mother of the bride," she said with professional politeness. "You're seated at table 19 for the reception near the back. The ceremony will begin in the East Ballroom in 30 minutes. Table 19 turned out to be the furthest from the bridal party's head table, positioned awkwardly near the kitchen entrance. The place cards revealed my table mates would be distant relatives and work colleagues deemed similarly unimportant to the social hierarchy of the event. My name card read simply Gail Harrington, while others had professional titles and affiliations printed beneath their names. As guests filtered in, I observed Thomas and Brittany making a grand entrance, air-kissing their way through the crowd. Brittany draped in designer couture that probably cost more than all the furniture in my apartment combined. Thomas had aged visibly, his once athletic frame now softened by prosperity and excess. His hairline receded, despite expensive treatments evident in the unnatural perfection of what remained. They passed within feet of me without recognition until I stepped forward. "Thomas, Brittany, lovely to see you both." Thomas startled, then forced a tight smile. "Gail, you made it. You look, well." Brittany, 15 years my junior, and clearly uncomfortable, gave a curt nod before tugging Thomas's sleeve. "Darling, the Andersons just arrived. We should say hello." Without further acknowledgement, they moved on, leaving me standing alone until an elderly woman approached, introducing herself as Jackson's grandmother. Unlike the others, her smile reached her eyes, genuine warmth emanating from her, despite her obviously aristocratic background. "You must be so proud of Madison," she said, patting my hand. "Such a beautiful, accomplished young woman. And now joining our family. Though between us," she lowered her voice conspiratorially, "I do wish my grandson had inherited a bit more humility along with the family business. Your daughter may have her work cut out for her." Her candor was refreshing amidst the superficial pleasantries, and I found myself warming to her immediately. "It's lovely to meet someone who values character over circumstances," I replied, careful not to reveal too much. "Oh, my dear, at my age you learn that bank accounts fluctuate, but character remains constant," she said with a knowing look before being called away by relatives. The ceremony itself was lavish but impersonal, with readings and music that seemed selected more for their impression on guests than any personal significance. Madison looked stunning in a designer gown that reportedly cost more than a luxury car, but her smile seemed practiced, her eyes darting constantly to the audience, as if seeking approval rather than focusing on the solemn promises being exchanged. I was seated in the 5th row behind various Williams family members and business associates, watching as Thomas proudly walked my daughter down the aisle, a privilege I had been denied through no fault beyond financial misfortune. The minister spoke of union and commitment without any personal anecdotes about the couple, suggesting a relationship more invested in appearance than substance. After the ceremony, the reception began with elaborate introductions of the wedding party, each accompanied by personal spotlights and customized music selections. I sipped champagne at my assigned table, making polite conversation with Jackson's third cousin from Boston and a junior associate from Madison's marketing firm. Neither showed much interest once they discovered I was just the mother of the bride, without impressive credentials or connections to offer. When dinner concluded and the multi-tiered wedding cake was wheeled out for the ceremonial cutting, I approached the head table hoping for a moment with Madison. She had barely acknowledged me during the reception, occupied with photographs and conversations with more socially valuable guests. I carried a small box containing my mother's sapphire ring, a family heirloom I had managed to keep during the bankruptcy by claiming it had been lost. "Madison, sweetheart," I said, touching her arm gently, "I wanted to give you something special. It was your grandmother's." She turned surprise flickering across her face, as if she had forgotten I was among the guests. "Oh, Mom, thanks, but we're about to cut the cake. Maybe later." Jackson appeared beside her champagne glass, in hand, his expression souring as he recognized me. "So this is the famous Gail," he said, his tone making the words an insult rather than greeting. "The business genius who crashed and burned. Madison's told me all about your spectacular failure." Madison looked uncomfortable but didn't defend me. "Jackson, let's just cut the cake. Everyone's waiting." No, I want to properly meet my new mother-in-law," he insisted, his voice carrying to nearby tables. "The woman who had it all and lost it because she couldn't adapt to changing markets. A cautionary tale for business students everywhere, right?" The cruelty of his words stung, but I maintained my dignity. "It's nice to finally meet you too, Jackson. I was just giving Madison a family heirloom for her something old and something blue." Jackson took the small box from my hands, opening it carelessly. "This old thing probably not even real sapphires. We already have the something blue covered, honey. Tiffany made sure of that." He snapped the box closed and handed it to a nearby server as if it were trash to be removed. Before I could respond, he grabbed my elbow firmly and steered me toward the massive wedding cake. "But since you're here, you should participate in the cake cutting. After all, what kind of son would I be if I didn't include my new mother-in-law in the festivities?" Madison followed, confusion evident as Jackson positioned me directly in front of the towering cake. Guests turned to watch, many whispering behind their hands. Thomas and Brittany observed from a nearby table, expressions caught between curiosity and embarrassment. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jackson announced, his voice projected to fill the ballroom, "before my beautiful bride and I cut this magnificent cake, I'd like to introduce her mother, Gail. Once upon a time, she was someone important in Chicago business circles, before she proved that women really can't handle the pressure of leadership." Gasps rippled through the crowd at his blatant sexism and cruelty. Madison tugged his sleeve, whispering something urgent that he ignored. I stood frozen, humiliation burning through me, but determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing me react. "Gail here has fallen quite far from her former glory." Jackson continued, his arm around my shoulders in a parody of affection. "Now she answers phones or files papers or something equally suited to her capabilities. But today she gets a taste of the luxury she once had and lost." With shocking suddenness, he grabbed the back of my head and forcefully shoved my face into the bottom tier of the wedding cake. The impact was disorienting, buttercream filling my nose and mouth, cake crumbling down my neck and onto my dress. As I struggled to right myself, stunned by the assault, I heard his final cruel statement clearly. "Try some dessert, beggar. It is probably the best meal you have had in years." The ballroom fell into horrified silence. As I straightened up, wiping cake from my eyes, I saw Madison's face torn between shock at her new husband's behavior and embarrassment at the scene he had created. She made no move to help me or condemn his actions, her social conditioning apparently stronger than family loyalty. I reached for a napkin with as much dignity as I could muster, determined not to break down in front of this crowd. The silence stretched uncomfortably until it was broken by a voice from the back of the room, loud and incredulous. "Do you know who she is? He is smashing a billionaire's face." Every head in the ballroom turned toward the voice. Standing near the bar was Sophia Reeves, my executive assistant at Fiancé, who had been invited as a friend of Madison's from college. While they had drifted apart over the years, Madison had included her out of obligation to their former friendship, unaware of Sophia's current employment or our connection. Sophia strode forward, her expression a mixture of outrage and fierce loyalty. "That woman whose face you just shoved into a cake is not some beggar. She is Gail Harrington, the actual owner and founder of Fiancé Technologies, recently acquired for over $300 million. Jackson's face drained of color. "What?" "No, that is impossible. She works as an office manager. Madison told me." "Madison told you what she believed to be true." Sophia continued, pulling out her phone and bringing up financial news articles. "Gail created Fiancé under a holding company to protect it from exactly this kind of prejudice and judgment. She is worth over $140 million as of last month's acquisition." A murmur swept through the crowd as Sophia displayed the articles showing the Fiancé acquisition, with mentions of the mysterious founder behind the public CEO. "I work directly for Gail. She hired me 2 years ago, but asked me not to mention it to Madison. She wanted to see who would value her as a person, not as a bank account." I stood silently, cake still clinging to my face and dress, watching the realization spread across the room. With deliberate calmness, I reached for another napkin and methodically began cleaning my face, maintaining eye contact with Jackson, as his expression cycled rapidly through disbelief, shock, and calculating interest. "There must be some mistake," he stammered suddenly, attempting a conciliatory smile. "It was just a joke, a silly wedding tradition gone wrong. Of course we value Gail for her wisdom and experience." From across the room, Thomas moved toward me with alarming speed, his expression transformed from previous dismissal to intense interest. "Gail, we should talk," he said quietly. "There have been misunderstandings between us that we should clear up for Madison's sake." I stepped back from both men, maintaining a dignity that contrasted sharply with their sudden transparent greed. "Sophia is correct." I confirmed, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "I rebuilt my life and my fortune without any of you knowing, because I wanted to understand who valued me as a person and who only saw dollar signs." Madison approached hesitantly, confusion and hurt evident in her expression. "Mom, is this true? Why wouldn't you tell me?" "Would it have mattered, Madison?" I asked gently. "Would you have treated me differently if you knew I had money again? Because that's exactly why I kept it private. I wanted my daughter to love me for being her mother, not for what I could provide materially." Sophia had made her way to my side, protectively handing me more napkins and her suit jacket to cover my ruined dress. She discreetly showed me her phone, where she had summoned a car that was already waiting outside, anticipating I might want to make a swift exit. Jackson, recovering from his initial shock, attempted damage control. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have an amazing surprise. My new mother-in-law has been keeping secrets, but now we can properly celebrate her incredible success as part of our special day." The transparent attempt to reframe his cruelty fell flat, met with uncomfortable silence from the guests who had witnessed his earlier behavior. His future grandmother-in-law, the kind elderly woman I had spoken with earlier, approached slowly, her expression stern. "Jackson Williams, I have never been so ashamed of anyone bearing our family name," she said firmly. "You have disgraced yourself and our entire family with your behavior today." Madison finally found her voice, though it trembled with uncertainty. "Mom, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me? All these years I thought—" "You thought I was a failure," I finished for her. "And that made it easier to choose your father's lifestyle and values over staying connected to me. It's a painful lesson for us both." Jackson tried once more to salvage the situation. "Gail, please. It was a misunderstanding. Let's not ruin Madison's special day. We're family now. I looked at him steadily, cake still smeared across my expensive navy dress. No, Jackson, we are not family. Family doesn't humiliate each other for sport. Family doesn't value wealth over character. You have shown exactly who you are today, and no amount of money, mine or yours, can disguise that reality. Turning to Madison, whose mascara had begun to run with unexpected tears, I spoke more gently. I love you, Madison. I always have through every phase of both our lives. When you're ready to talk, really talk about what matters beyond bank accounts and status, I'll be waiting. With that, I walked steadily toward the exit, Sophia beside me. Thomas attempted to intercept us, his hand outstretched, but I moved past him without acknowledgement. The ballroom remained in stunned silence as the doors closed behind us. In the car, the composure I had maintained finally cracked. I never intended for it to happen this way, I told Sophia, hands shaking as the adrenaline wore off. I was going to tell Madison privately after seeing how the wedding played out. He deserved worse than public humiliation, Sophia replied fiercely. And with respect, Ms. Harrington, maybe this was exactly how it needed to happen. Sometimes people only see the truth when it's dramatically unavoidable. As we drove away from the peninsula, I felt an unexpected lightness beneath the distress and cake residue. The secret I had carried for years was finally revealed, and while the aftermath would be complicated, there was relief in no longer living a divided life. Whether Madison would choose authentic relationship over material advantage remained to be seen. But at least now the choice would be made with full knowledge of the facts. The real question was whether the revelation of my wealth would bring my daughter back to me for the right reasons, or simply add another materialistic dimension to our already strained relationship. I spent the night after the wedding in my modest apartment, removing dried cake from my hair and trying to salvage the ruined dress, though it was clearly beyond recovery. Despite the humiliation and emotional turmoil, I slept more peacefully than I had in years, unburdened of the secret that had defined my life for so long. Morning brought a flood of messages, missed calls, and news alerts. Sophia had implemented our long-standing crisis management protocol, ensuring no employees discussed the wedding incident publicly and engaging our legal team to address any potential defamation. The business side was under control, but the personal fallout demanded attention. I ignored calls from Thomas and text messages from unknown numbers, presumably belonging to Jackson or his family. Instead, I made coffee and waited, knowing that if Madison truly wanted reconciliation, she would find her way to me. At 11:30 that morning, the buzzer for my apartment sounded. Through the intercom, I heard Madison's voice, strained but determined. "Mom, it's me. Can we talk?" When I opened the door, I barely recognized my daughter. Gone was the perfectly coiffed bride of yesterday, replaced by a young woman with smeared makeup, rumpled clothing, and red-rimmed eyes that suggested hours of crying. Most surprisingly, she wore her wedding dress wrinkled and stained, as if she had left directly from the reception. "You didn't go on your honeymoon," I observed, stepping aside to let her enter. "How could I?" she asked, collapsing onto my small sofa. Everything I thought I knew just exploded in front of 200 people. I sat beside her, maintaining some distance. "I'm sorry it happened that way, Madison. That wasn't my intention." "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, anger and hurt mingling in her voice. "All these years watching you struggle, feeling sorry for you, embarrassed by you. And it was all a lie." "It wasn't a lie," I corrected gently. "I did lose everything. I did struggle. I did rebuild from nothing. The only thing I kept from you was my success, and I did that because I needed to know who would love me without the trappings of wealth." Madison was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "So it was a test you were testing me." "Not intentionally, not at first," I admitted. "Initially, I kept it private to protect the new business from being associated with my previous failure. But as time passed and I saw how differently people treated me based on their perception of my financial status, yes, it became a sort of unintended test. One that almost everyone in my life failed spectacularly. Her phone buzzed continuously as we talked, the screen lighting up with Jackson's name repeatedly. She glanced at it, but didn't answer. "He's been calling all night," she explained unnecessarily. "After you left, everything fell apart. His grandmother read him the riot act in front of everyone. Dad tried to chase after you, but couldn't find where you'd gone. The guests started leaving. It was a disaster." "I'm sorry your wedding was ruined," I said sincerely. "Are you?" she challenged. "Because part of me thinks you planned this whole reveal to humiliate me the way Jackson humiliated you." The accusation stung, but I recognized the defensive response of someone confronting uncomfortable truths about themselves. Madison. If I had planned it, would I have allowed cake to be smashed in my face first? Would I have subjected myself to Jackson's cruelty? Think logically. Sophia reacted to defend me, not to execute some elaborate revenge scheme. She deflated slightly, acknowledging the logic. "I don't even know who I am anymore, Mom. Everything I thought I was building with Jackson looks different now. Every conversation, every plan we made, was any of it real? Or was I just another acquisition for his collection?" "That's something only you can answer," I replied. "But consider this: if he loved you for who you truly are, would he have treated your mother that way, regardless of her financial status?" Madison's phone buzzed again this time, with a text that made her face pale. She turned the screen toward me wordlessly. The message from Jackson read, "Your mother is worth a fortune. Make things right, or you'll regret it. My family is already talking prenup violations." "He's threatening me," she whispered, "using your money as leverage." The revelation didn't surprise me, but seeing the naked greed in writing confirmed everything I had suspected about Jackson Williams. "And now you know exactly who he is," I said quietly. "The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?" Madison stared at her wedding ring, twisting it absently. "I don't know if I can go back. Not after what he did to you. Not after seeing how quickly he changed when he thought you had money. But I don't know if I can walk away either. We just got married, for God's sake. 200 people watched us exchange vows." "Those same 200 people watched him assault your mother and call her a beggar," I pointed out. "Which do you think made the more lasting impression?" We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of decisions hanging between us. Finally, Madison spoke, her voice small but resolute. "I need some time to think. About Jackson, about us, about who I've become. But I don't want to go home to him right now." "You can stay here as long as you need," I offered. "The spare bedroom isn't fancy, but it's yours." She looked around my modest apartment with new eyes, seeing not the absence of luxury, but the presence of authenticity. "All this time you could have lived in a penthouse, had the best of everything. Why did you choose this? Because things aren't what matter, Madison. Relationships are. Character is. I wanted to live in a way that reflected my values, not my bank account. The money isn't who I am. It's just a tool I can use for purposes that matter." She nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "I need to shower and change out of this dress. Can I borrow something?" "Of course," I said, rising to find her comfortable clothes. As I opened my closet, revealing the simple, practical wardrobe that reflected my modest public persona, Madison appeared in the doorway. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry, Mom," she said quietly. "Not just for yesterday, but for the last 10 years. For choosing Dad's lifestyle over our relationship. For being embarrassed by you when I should have been proud of your resilience." It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a beginning. As Madison disappeared into the bathroom, her ruined wedding dress discarded on the floor like a shed skin, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps from this painful public revelation, something authentic might finally grow between us. Over the next few days, Madison remained at my apartment, fielding increasingly desperate calls from Jackson and coldly strategic overtures from Thomas, who had apparently learned of my financial resurrection and was eager to reconnect for Madison's sake. She ignored most of these communications while struggling to process the rapid unraveling of everything she had believed about her life and relationships. On the third morning, as we shared coffee at my small kitchen table, Madison looked up with clear eyes that reminded me of the thoughtful child she had once been before materialism and status had clouded her perspective. "I met with a lawyer yesterday while you were at work," she said calmly. "I'm filing for annulment on grounds of fraud. Jackson apparently knew about my trust fund from Dad, but never disclosed his own significant gambling debts. The lawyer thinks we have a strong case, especially with witnesses to his behavior at the wedding." I nodded, supporting her decision without imposing my opinion. "Whatever you decide, I'm here for you." "There's more," she continued. "I resigned from the marketing firm. I can't represent luxury brands convincing people they need stuff to be happy anymore, not after seeing how empty that whole world is." Her transformation seemed almost too rapid to be believable, but trauma has a way of crystallizing realizations that might otherwise take years to develop. "What will you do next?" I asked. "I was hoping," she said hesitantly, "that maybe there might be a place for me at Finclear, not because you're my mother, but because I actually have skills that could be useful. I'd start at the bottom, learn the business properly." The request surprised me, not because it was unwelcome, but because it reflected a humility I hadn't seen in her for years. "We can certainly discuss it," I agreed. "But first, I think we need time to rebuild our relationship as mother and daughter separate from any business considerations." Madison nodded, understanding the wisdom in this approach. "I'd like that. I feel like I need to get to know you all over again, the real you, not the version I constructed in my mind." Over the following weeks, that's exactly what we did. Madison moved into her own apartment, modest by her previous standards, but comfortable paid for with her own savings rather than Thomas's money or my newfound wealth. We had dinner together twice weekly, each conversation peeling back layers of misunderstanding and rebuilding bridges long neglected. The annulment proceeded without public drama, though Jackson made several attempts to negotiate financial settlements in exchange for his cooperation. His tune changed dramatically when Madison's lawyer produced evidence of his gambling, and the prenuptial agreement he had insisted upon worked against him when his own financial misrepresentations came to light. Thomas made several transparent attempts to re-enter my life, each one more obsequious than the last. I declined all overtures politely, but firmly explaining that while he would always be Madison's father, our relationship had ended the moment he betrayed our marriage vows. The clarity was liberating, allowing me to finally close that chapter without bitterness or regret. 6 months after the wedding disaster, I finally moved from my modest apartment to a comfortable but not ostentatious condominium overlooking Lake Michigan. The space reflected my actual financial status, while maintaining the values that had guided my rebuild, filled with quality pieces that would last, rather than showy status symbols that would need replacing with each new trend. Madison joined Finclear as an entry-level marketing associate, working her way through departments to understand the business from multiple perspectives. Her colleagues respected her work ethic and creativity, most unaware of her relationship to me, until she had proven herself on her own merits. Our Sunday dinners became a cherished tradition. Sometimes just the two of us occasionally, including Sophia or other close friends who had stood by me during difficult times. During one such dinner, as we enjoyed dessert on my balcony overlooking the lake, Madison asked a question that revealed how far we had come. "Do you ever regret not telling me about your success sooner? We lost so many years." I considered carefully before answering. I regret the pain you experienced, learning the truth so dramatically. But I don't regret the lesson it taught us both. You needed to see for yourself the conditional nature of relationships built on status and wealth. And I needed to trust that the daughter I raised would eventually find her way back to the values that truly matter. Madison nodded, understanding. I'm glad Jackson showed his true colors so publicly. As humiliating as it was in the moment, it was impossible to ignore or explain away. Sometimes the most painful revelations are the ones we need most. As the sun set over Lake Michigan, painting the water in shades of gold and pink, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment of genuine connection. The public humiliation that had seemed so devastating had become the catalyst for authentic relationship. The cake that had been smashed in my face had ultimately provided the sweetest outcome imaginable, a daughter who now saw clearly and chose connection over appearance, substance over status. Have you ever experienced a moment of public humiliation that unexpectedly led to something positive in your life, or discovered someone's true character in a difficult moment? Share your story in the comments below. If this tale of redemption and reconciliation touched you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need reminding that sometimes our most painful moments can lead to our greatest blessings. Thank you for listening, and remember, true wealth isn't measured by your bank account, but by the authenticity of your relationships and the integrity of your character.